Start now. I'm very happy to see you again. And
Hi.
also, I'm super happy to continue our fruitful conversations regarding the history of the Middle East, history of settler colonialism, history of relations between indigenous population, settler population. And one of the focal points in the past 32, 33 years is the infamous Oslo peace accord from 1993, when two parties agreed to reshape the map and change the paradigm between two parties. What we have after 32 years, I think that Oslo was dead for at least 20 or more years. What's your perspective on Oslo?
I think Oslo is very much alive.
Okay.
I think that even in the post October 7th world, which is a different world, we're still in the Oslo era. And uh, the structure is still there. I think that in as much as Oslo was a road to two states with a two-state solution, which that wasn't the case in its initial steps. This is not how Rabin envisioned it, but definitely Arafat did. In as much as it was it's a piece of the historical infrastructure for the for the case for two states, maybe. I think that it has proven to be sustainable. And in as much as it has its 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 problem is that it was very malleable and it was used by corrupt uh, on the one hand and sometimes nefarious. I would say nefarious. It's not a good word for a historian, but it was definitely taken advantage by those that resist the two-state solution, especially in Israel, to create a status quo in which Israel remains dominant, the Palestinians govern themselves, and uh, and Israel is able to build settlements, uh, and the Palestinians are undersigned on that situation. They're a party to that status. So, so I don't. So failure is, of course, if you if you examine what the two sides wanted to do when entering it, the Israelis wanted security and the Palestinian wanted a state. So neither has happened.
Of
Israelis
course.
are not more secure, and the Palestinians don't have a state. But the framework, the general framework, uh, has remained stable, uh, if if shaky.
Do you think that two-state solution is more realistic than one-state solution? And
100%.
in one-state solution, I think about the South African model.
This is something I constantly say to my students on social media. The the one state solution, if we're talking about any solution that really recognizes the collective rights of Jews in Palestine, not necessarily allowing automatic naturalization of all Jews, but a state that sees that is constitutionally for Jews maybe not only Jews. Um, that is uh, an unpopular solution amongst Israelis and Zionists. And that's one thing. But it's also a rather unpopular solution among Palestinians.
Of course.
So you're, advocating for it in American academia, which is this has been, I would say, in the last 10 years, I've seen articles that have buried the two-state solution and called for a one-state, a binational state. Um, this is definitely the popular solution in academic circles in the West. But the people that have the biggest stake in a
Yeah.
solution, which are the Palestinians,
And
up until
Israelis.
October 7th, Israelis lived a relatively comfortable life. So the people that had the biggest stake in how to solve the situation didn't opt didn't want the solution. Now that doesn't mean that the solution that they did want is the two-state solution, but it seems to me that if neither side is interested in that in a certain path, then I don't see how it can be described as the realistic path.
Of course.
And that can change,
Of
obviously.
course.
That can change at any moment. But and there's a good connection between the two questions that you said about whether Oslo is viable or did Oslo succeed, and two states or one state solution, not total defeat of one side or the other. If in I think the moment for a one state was the first Intifada, 1988. If there was ever a moment in which Israelis or Jewish Israelis and Palestinians really shared the same spaces and were interdependent in terms of economies, then a demand for equal rights it would have been best to issue it at that time during the first Intifada. But the first Intifada was all about an independent Palestinian state.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's not. I'm not. I'm not giving the moral high ground or the authority to conclude which solution should be sought to the weak party necessarily. Sometimes, you might think from your particular ethical point of view that the weak party that the oppressed should be the ones that have the say on what solution is carried out. But that's not the path that the Palestinians wanted. And it's unreasonable to expect Israelis to give up on having an exclusively Jewish state, not necessarily in population, but in ethos and in majority nationality.
Yeah, I mean, most of
Israelis
Israelis,
will
of
not give
course,
that up voluntarily.
they support the idea of exclusivist state, which I, from the very beginning, I personally, from the very beginning, believe that this is the core problem. The core problem was about exclusivism and about one party dictating so-called minorities. In fact, they're not minorities; they're autochthonous population on that territory for a couple of thousand years, or maybe a couple of hundreds of years. And in my personal opinion, they should all compromise. Stronger party should compromise when they have a leverage. Usually, you make the deal when
That never happens though.
It never happens, and it backfires people who don't
Yeah,
make
it
the deal
never
at the right
happens.
point. Usually, you make
But
the deal when you're strong. You don't make the deal when you're
but
weaker.
look, I'm not categorically opposed to
Yeah,
a one state solution, right?
of course,
But you would have to have a major Palestinian faction
of course,
advocating for it.
of course.
So to challenge Israel's total unwillingness to go down that path, there is none.
But
When it
what
comes
about the
to
Israeli side? Do
two
they support
states,
one state solution?
when
Do
it
they
comes to
say
two
it?
states,
Yeah.
I would say between Fatah and Hamas, which just recently reiterated its willingness to come to terms with a two-state reality.
Hmm.
Um, I would say the two states is hegemonic in Palestinian society. Maybe not in surveys, right? You take
Yeah.
Shkaki's surveys, you see a different picture. But in terms of the dominant political parties and factions and organizations, uh, um, the medium term goal is definitely the creation of an independent Palestinian state that is engaged with in agreements with Israel, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's my cold assessment on the. Oh, and then you have October 7th, right? I've been saying the same thing before October 7th. I didn't
Of
get any.
course.
October 7th really surprised me. Was not prepared for it. Its scope.
Actually, I'm not surprised with October 7th, to be honest.
I was surprised by not. I didn't think it didn't. It didn't. I didn't think that there was any. I didn't think there was capability. I knew that there was intention,
Yeah.
and I thought there was more capability on the Israeli side also to prevent such a thing from happening.
Some
But
people would say that they couldn't prevent because the army's IDF is busy in the West Bank helping settlers and
yeah,
helping
yeah.
expansion of settlements.
Saleh Saleh Aruri said that.
Lots of Israeli intellectuals said that,
Yeah,
and lots of
yeah.
Hamas intellectuals in the States said that this is the repercussion of shifting focus from Gaza to the West Bank.
Yeah. I
And
mean, it
I'm
definitely
looking,
didn't help.
I
But
look at, no,
if you
continue, sorry. I'm
so,
interested
and
in
we should go get back to Oslo. But I will
it.
say that after October 7th, um, the notion that a one state is something after October 7th and the Israeli retaliation in Gaza.
Uh-huh.
How are these two people are going to share one political system in which nonviolence and democracy is supposed to reign? At the short term, I don't understand. But
It can work out. In ex-Yugoslavia, we had a civil war during World War II. So we had the Nazi and fascist occupation, and we had the civil war between different, I wouldn't say ethnic group, but different religious groups. Because for me
mm,
personally, Roman Catholics, Muslims, and Orthodox who live in that area are from the same ethnic background. So we had a confessional and ideological war because the Communist Party also had their revolution. And they managed to contain these animosities for 40, 50 years. So the same can be done with, maybe not the same, but at least we should try to
but you can say
de-radicalize
that
and de-escalate.
you can say that during the mandate period,
Yeah,
those animosities were contained.
they were contained. We had animosities during the mandate period. We had the uh, anti-Semitic anti-Semitic attacks from both sides.
Yeah.
'Cause-
In any case, if you want to return back to Oslo,
yeah,
then I think that um, uh, don't plan the funeral before the body dies. That's
yeah.
what.
So you believe that Oslo is still
It's
an
still the
important.
framework.
It's a framework. Yes, I also believe it's a framework, but I also see that for the past 10, 15 years, the peace process was undermined and I would say dead. Nothing happened.
That is entirely correct.
And such things helped radicalization and violence that we're witnessing these days. And of course, violence in the West Bank and Gaza directly affects region, directly affects countries like Jordan, countries like Egypt, countries
And
like Yemen.
and even worse, it affects American campuses.
It does affect American campuses. And
Let's not forget the most important repercussions.
of course, this is so important.
American student life is disturbed.
But also, I mean, how's the situation at your university? How people?
I teach in a university called Lehigh University. It's
Okay,
an hour's drive from Philadelphia, an hour and 15 minutes. It is unbelievably quiet.
very
I'm
good.
almost disappointed, but all around me, Princeton,
Of course.
Columbia, and of course UPenn. There is a lot of activity. There is some act. I mean, I gave the semester's last lecture yesterday, and we did it outside. And of course, the vocabulary I use is sometimes very explosive, like colonialism, settler
Okay.
colonialism, apartheid. I use all these words. Uh, the listeners who have listened to the other chapters know that it's hard to fit me with a particular agenda, but still, I don't avoid controversial topics. No one cared. I gave this lecture outside. No one, students
Maybe
walked
they
by.
care, but they're not so antagonized by the situation. Or
Yeah, I I don't know. I don't know. My students, it's a class of 30 people. You would think that once you have on the books a course about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, that it will attract the people that feel passionate about it. But my students happen to be genuinely curious, and you know, I was never thrown, never was I thrown slogans from either
yeah,
side. Like I was never thrown, but Jews are indigenous to Palestine, or I was never said, or the opposites.
yeah, of course.
Israel as committing genocide for 75 years. I
Okay.
haven't gotten those. Um, uh, I don't know. Maybe my
Maybe you're
temperament
lucky
wore
with
off.
your students. Maybe
Yeah,
the whole.
yeah, they listened, but otherwise, it's a big deal.
It is a big.
I I again, I like this free talk that's less related to Oslo, but I can say that if I were, as an Israeli, as a patriot, as a Zionist, even, I would not dismiss this phenomenon as anti-Semitism, pure and simple.
This is very
Um,
complex issue. Even the term anti-Semitism can be described both ways.
I agree. I
You,
agree. And
we
and
Arabs are
some
more Semitic than many Israelis. I would say
and sometimes I
my interpretation, but
yeah. We can get into that.
exactly
Let's
this
talk
is a
about
very good
Oslo. Let's
topic.
talk about Oslo, and maybe if we have some time, we'll discuss the current affairs. But um, uh, definitely, I can, if you want me to relate this. These are these demonstrations now are of, to the extent that the demonstrators have some knowledge in history. These are people that think that Oslo was a Zionist trap.
Do you think so? Do you think that Oslo was a Zionist trap?
No, I don't.
I don't
No, I
think it
don't.
was a Zionist trap. I mean, some people, of course, within the Arabic camp,
Yeah.
like people who
So
from the Popular Front of Liberation of Palestine, thought that any kind of normalization is a Zionist and Western threat.
yeah, and I would say that in the Israeli side, people say that it was a terrorist uh, trap
Of course.
laid by Arafat that Rabin fell right into.
Okay.
And just that fact should alert us
Yeah,
to to the probability, not that neither is correct, right? If both sides, not even the extreme elements of them, right?
yeah, these
The
are
centrist
moderate.
Israelis freely, even center left Israelis freely subscribe to the idea that Oslo was a trap, and I would say even Palestinians who support down the line a two-state solution, or not down the line, would want a two-state solution, also think that um, there were bad intentions at the beginning of this process. Uh, that that fact alone, the fact that there's an opposite way of looking at things, should suggest that it's neither of them.
Of course.
And
First of all, they don't have other framework. I would like to hear better framework from Israeli side or from Arabic side than Oslo Peace Accord. What's their
well,
framework?
yeah,
The cleansing of
that's let me tell. So I conducted a research
yes, please.
about the and I have published it in form of a podcast, an 8-chapter podcast. It's in Hebrew. It's called Hesket Oslo. Hesket is kind of a highbrow way of saying podcast. We
Okay.
call it the Oslo podcast. And I'm trying. We are talking to some potential partners in the United States to translate it to English and to update its content with the vantage point of October 7th, not really changing the findings that that happened before because the future does not affect the past, but or shouldn't if you're a good historian. So I went into this Oslo thing really trying to let go of the biases, trying to really understand, reconstruct this process from the bottom up, um, and avoid the anachronisms and avoid and trying to sidestep the knowledge that the the process halted in the year 2000, and that the talks were unsuccessful.
Mhm.
And I came out with I'd say three important conclusions. The first would be that neither side conspired to mislead the other side and harm them. The parties the parties that were signed that the parties that supported the Oslo Accords on both sides, meaning the Labor government and its very very loose coalition, and Fatah and its also very loose coalition. So those agreements were signed in good faith. There is a popular notion in Israel and the West and the pro-Israel camp in the West that Arafat, you know, merely did this in order to save his own. Elevate his own status from exiled leader of dwindling PLO, financially, to the head of a statelet that could continue to wage armed struggle against Israel. That absolutely makes no sense.
Mhm.
I've the type of smoking guns that people suggest that there are, so certain things that Arafat said over the years that he'll go back on his word, or this means nothing, and one day Palestine. These things are all, there's no substantive uh, evidence for that. Um, and but it also doesn't really fit within the logic of this is not how you can conduct conspiracies.
Mm-hmm.
Arafat, you probably know this as well as I do, was considered the moderate in the leadership of the PLO, Israel, first implicitly and then explicitly, and in the idea that he said things publicly, but amongst in Arabic, uh, uh, um, around his coterie, I don't even know how that would work. He was insincere, but if you are a leader of a nation, if when you pronounce um, the recognition of the state of Israel, you are not preparing your population to do the opposite. I can't, I don't know what is in Arafat's mind, but I know that he could not have passed the secret note to the entirety of the Palestinians in the territories and in diaspora, saying, "I don't really mean it." Yeah, he didn't relay uh, oral secret. He gave a message. Told Abu Mazen, "Oh, Abu Allah, that I don't really mean it," and then Abu Allah told. That doesn't work that way. So once the undeniable head of the Palestinian National Movement says that he recognizes Israel and is willing to advance towards an agreement with it, that is something that has historical significance. It's on the record. And if you look at the 90s, you see that overall the Palestinian Authority maybe did not crack down on Hamas as Israel would want it to. That's for sure. Maybe did not prevent uh, terrorist attacks as diligently as Israel wanted it to, and the United States wanted to.
We're talking about 90s and 90s
Yeah,
terror attacks
yeah.
by
And Arafat himself didn't didn't reiterate his recognition of Israel in every speech that he gave the Palestinian people. He never became a Zionist. He was always the head of the Palestinian National Movement.
Mm-hmm.
So, but even so, Arafat, Arafat, only at the beginning of the Second Intifada really green lighted attacks against Israel.
Yeah, we're
Up
talking
until
about
then,
the
yeah,
second.
and I'm not saying and I'm not saying that he never lied, that he never played dumb about activities that were happening under his authority, so-called authority. But but in my research in the podcast, I could tell that Arafat had not only the Israelis on his mind, he also had the Palestinian public opinion that was fastly becoming more sympathetic to Hamas,
Of course.
and and uh, and in as much as Netanyahu, we have no we reasonable people understand that as much as Netanyahu become corrupted by his own interests, that he has to look at his right flank. So did Arafat.
They
And
were not honest enough, sincere enough to pursue for the realization of the peace process. And we know that
Eh,
Netanyahu publicly said that he doesn't want to give up the border with Jordan. He wants to keep IDF on Jordanian border and doesn't want to stop building illegal settlements. So settlements are still ongoing, and we can compare number of
yeah,
people
that is yeah,
now and before.
that that is so in any case, so like the first finding I had was that the deterioration of the process. I wouldn't know what would be how to quantify his responsibility, right? But there is no proof that he had bad intentions. It
Yeah.
makes no sense. Hear me out. It makes no sense that Arafat would sabotage this process, not gain a state because of the sabotage. Because if the theory is that he just wanted that state to be a jumping board for the like the 10-point plan, right? To entirely take over Palestine, then he should have said yes to a Barack offer of a state in 90 something percent of the West Bank,
Mhm.
and that and if he got that state, then he could have continued to wage struggle against Israel. So the theory, the Israeli theory of the case, does not pass the test of logic, right?
Mhm.
It's it's kind of hard to prove a non-fact, right? That there was a Arafat intention, right, for the process to fail and for more Israelis to die after the Oslo Accords were signed. Um, should do you want to stop here or
We can stop here, and I'm going to
and then
send you
send me another link?
another link. Yeah, because maybe you're
Okay.
going to talk more than 3 minutes. I
Yeah.
don't want to limit you, so
Sure.
I'm going
Sure.
to send you the link in 5 minutes.
Sure.
Regarding Oslo, what should be done in 2024? What should be done now after all kinds of escalations, and how to de-escalate the current situation?
I'm a historian. I know I don't have clear answers of what needs to be done. It's obvious that the United States, that the current administration would like to move forward with some sort of with in the direction of two states. It's trying to force Netanyahu to say two states, just to say it, and he won't. I if I give credit to Arafat for when he declared that he recognized the state of Israel, that meant something. That doesn't mean he couldn't go back on it or anything like that, but that had historical consequences. The same would go if Netanyahu would just say, "I recognize the right of the Palestinians for a state." By the way, I recently looked at the Bar Ilan speech that he gave in 2009. It's considered the most dovish that Netanyahu ever was. And if you see that, if you look at the text, it's very clear that he says, if the Palestinians recognize Israel as the state of the Jewish people, then I will recognize their right for state.
To statehood.
Yeah, their right.
Yeah.
We'll negotiate the parameters of that state, but I will recognize their right for a demilitarized state. It's always with the military.
Hmm.
But it is conditional.
Of course.
So if you ever, so I'm guessing Obama tried to do the same thing that Biden is trying to do now, and Netanyahu was willing to do that, but he conditioned his recognition of a eventual Palestinian state. So Biden obviously is trying to get that to happen. He knows that if that does happen, the Israeli government will dissolve. There'll be elections, and there's a chance that a coalition in Israel that is willing to go to two states will emerge. And to me, that's what it seems that that Netanyahu is trying to do, that Biden is trying to do, and pressuring Netanyahu to do it with the combinations of sticks and carrots. You see the
Of course.
settlements, the sanctioning of settlers on the one hand, and the temptation of a normalization agreement with Saudi Arabia.
Do you think they're trying to coerce Netanyahu's cabinets because of the upcoming elections in the United States?
They would have to.
Yeah.
Um, if Trump is elected, then I think that changes everything. I wouldn't know what would be the second Trump presidency, but I see the collapse of the world order.
You think so?
America will still be a very strong country, but the way it intervenes in the world and its uh, and the camp that solidified around it, I think that would change drastically. And then it's any man's guess on what will happen. I don't think it's not even unlikely that it's not completely unreasonable that Trump, now that he doesn't have Kushner in his orbit,
Hmm.
Kushner being, you know, not the most radical Zionist in American politics, but still very much someone who's, you know, offered a plan in which the Palestinians do not get a state as the final status. So if Kushner is so if another Trump presidency, you wouldn't know. I know it seems to me that on a intuitive level, on a emotional level, Trump has less feelings for Israel than Biden does.
Okay.
Yeah, this is something that it's important for him when it comes to uh, it, Israel is part of the culture wars in the United States. Um, the evangelical right is pro-Israeli. That's an important constituency for Trump. But I really think that he's. I don't think he has this emotional connection that Biden definitely has. Um, and so it's any man's guess what will happen if Trump is elected. Things will not be the same. You know, he will not go follow the same path than that Biden. Yeah, and so up until October 7th, Biden seemed to think that there's time. Suddenly he's
Of course.
yeah.
But we have radicalization or we have escalation from the moment Netanyahu was reelected in December 2022. In the
Yes.
West Bank,
Is I agree. I agree.
we had tit for
Israelis
tat
are
killings all the time. This is a pre-October 7 scenario, which was very explosive and very unstable for almost a year.
I agree. And Israelis are unfortunately not that much aware of it because they were concerned with the judicial overhaul.
Mm.
So
What was the perception of people in the peace camp in Israel? How they are
now
perceived by majority of Israelis and majority of Zionists.
Not good.
Of course, people complain that
uh,
they are being arrested or that they're going to be arrested if they get back to Israel. I'm talking about some academics and history professors who are under fire because of their anti-war and pro de-escalation stance.
uh, so you're talking about the Israeli peace camp?
I'm talking about Israeli peace camp, and of course, I'm talking about American peace camp because many of them have dual nationality. If Israel wants to arrest them, they can hide in the U.S. They don't have to go back to Israel because of legal consequences of their political activism.
Uh, some might feel that way, others may not. What happened to Professor Kevorkian
Yeah.
is definitely very alarming. Um, I think we're nearing the point where uh, where left wing opinion in Israel is deemed illegal. We're very close to that point. If you're not Jewish, then more or less that's the case right now. It's very arbitrary, um, but that is not, I think, the most important issue about what dual nationality scholars have the limits of the Israeli academic freedom, which is narrowing for sure, and it is important. It's very much important to me, but I think the problems run much deeper, and if those are solved, those need to be addressed, and if those are solved, the other things will, I think, improve as well. I want to say something though about I told you about the Israeli thesis about
Yeah.
Oslo. I want to talk about the Palestinian thesis,
Go ahead.
and that the Palestinian thesis is does have some concrete evidence in the sense that Rabin did not want a Palestinian state, that he declared it a month before he died. Again, if I extend Arafat the credibility of when he said something that meant something, right? Even if it wasn't 100% mirror of his true feelings, but he recognized Israel. Then Rabin said that there will not be a Palestinian state. He said less than a state. And so you could take that. Rabin was assassinated a month after. Rabin undoubtedly was the most, I would say, peace oriented prime minister of the 90s. And if he said that there won't be a Palestinian state once this is done, then you could say that there was never any intention. That could be true.
Do you think
Um,
it's the case?
uh, I think that his outlook would have evolved if he would have remained prime minister. But by the way, I don't think he would have won. I don't think he would have remained prime minister had he not been assassinated.
Yeah.
So so we don't really know, but we do know that Barack offered a state, and we also know that Clinton, in the Clinton parameters, within the parameters that Israeli agreed to, there was a Palestinian state. Now I can explain why the Palestinians rejected these plans.
Go ahead, please.
But before I do that, I can also say that neither Barack nor Clinton offered these plans with the for no knowledge that they will be rejected. In
Mm-hmm.
fact, they thought that these were very generous offers for the Palestinians, and yet they were rejected. So so uh, so the idea that there was an Israeli conspiracy guided by a Zionist approach to the land of Israel that cannot be shared, right? If that is supposedly the case, then Barak would not have offered a deal. That's all.
Yeah.
And if you want to talk about why they said no, that is an entire episode of the podcast that I dedicate to Camp David.
Mm-hmm.
And I really try to understand what happened there because the Israeli narrative is again that there was no partner.
Mm-hmm.
Um, looking, questioning some of the people there, I found um, uh, his name is first name is Daniel. Of course, I mentioned his name. I found someone who was privy to a lot of the talks at the time, Daniel Reisner.
Okay.
He was a high-ranking officer in the Israeli in some sort of legal unit in the Israeli military. And now he's in private practice as a lawyer in one of the biggest firms in Israel. Serious guy, smart guy, and I don't know if you're familiar with Einat Wilf.
No, I'm not.
She's a
Maybe he
doc.
was, yeah,
She
maybe she
has
was
a
the part of
PhD.
the team, negotiating team or
No, no, no. She became. She's a researcher and she does a lot of speaking.
okay.
Uh, Her thing is the right of return, that the Palestinians have need to give up on the right of return, and then we can have peace. And that they don't have a right of return. She's I would say, uh, she likes to define herself as not being right winger, yet all her politics suggest that she a right wing tendency. But never mind. What I'm saying is that she wrote a book, and in that book, a quote by Reisner is supposedly the proof that the the right of return was what collapsed the the
Camp David
Camp
negotiation.
David Accords.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went to that Reisner and asked him, and he said, "No, that wasn't the way she's quoting him, the way she's relying on him as a witness is misleading in a way." But he's also so this person as a lawyer, and dealt he did a lot of the verbiage of the Oslo Accords over the years. He attended a lot of the negotiations. He was sometimes the man in the room. Sometimes he was the man in one of the rooms because there's different teams of negotiations. But he said basically that Camp David failed because there was no zone of possible agreement, ZOPA. It's a
Mm.
term from business administration
Yeah.
studies. And basically, what the Israelis were willing to give circa 2000, the Israeli prime minister was willing to give circa 2000, was not something that Arafat could accept circa 2000. And that's it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Now, uh, there's three core issues in the negotiation: the borders, the borders slash settlements,
Yeah.
right? East Jerusalem, and the refugees.
Yeah.
So I would say that the problem is that the Jerusalem and the borders are 67 issues, are issues that arose in 67. The refugees is a 48 issue.
48 issue, of course.
Yeah. Now, it's a proven concept. Israel can exist without East Jerusalem and the territories.
Mm-hmm.
No one has ever made an Israel without the Nakba.
Yeah.
So the refugee issue, whether on whatever side you stand on it, is existential for Israelis.
Of course.
And I think that Palestinians understood that. And if you look at the way the PLO and now even Hamas talks about the refugee issue, it's always in accordance with the international law and the UN decisions. There's always some sort of caveat. I scarcely have seen it ever addressed as until all the refugees return to their. It's an issue of a just solution. That's always how it's described in declarations. So there's even, I would say, a suggestion that this is the topic that they're willing to compromise with. But it's a vital topic for the Palestinians. I'm not dismissing it, right? But it is where things become existential for Israel. So since there's this demand, and there's demand for a capital in East Jerusalem, and there's a demand for the entirety of the territories, not 92% of the territories, but 100% of the territories, which are only 22% of historic Palestine. So if Israel would have shown more quote unquote generosity on those two other issues, then perhaps a deal could have been struck, right? But since we know that Israel, it cannot go 100% on the refugee issue, then it should at least be close to that 100% on the other two issues. The Barak proposals in Camp David, ridiculous.
Okay.
If you look at the map, if you look at what he suggested in terms of Jerusalem, that Abu Dis will be the capital, then we have the Clinton parameters, which are closer to 100% of the territories, not yet, and to more equitable division of Jerusalem, but not equal division of Jerusalem. Then you have the Palestinians saying, yes, the Clinton parameters is a good starting point, right? But even those are something that, if you are familiar with the Palestinian discourse of a compromise with Israel that says a state in 67 borders and Jerusalem and a just solution to the refugees, you know that Arafat had very little room to compromise there. In fact, those that supported this solution told Arafat, you're not going to get us there because you've already given up on 78% of the land.
Yeah.
Right? So when people say that Palestinians were refused to compromise during 2000, 2001, they're not wrong to a certain extent, but it's in complete oblivion to the fact that the Palestinians consider themselves as having been, that they have compromised already over 78% of their homeland. So if there was just no Zopa, let's just say that. I think that, let's say I was the prime minister of Israel, I think I would have been able, this is very conceited of me, I admit, but let's just say that, I would have been willing to, not me, Olmert, right? The former mayor of Jerusalem from the Likud, right?
Yes.
He gave a deal that Abu Mazen suggested more than once could have been it. right? And there's reason why they didn't close the deal. We can talk about that. But the reasons that people like Olmert are not in control, just because there's reasons why people like Olmert are not in control, it's not because of Zionism. It has to do with the historical circumstances of the conflict. And you could say that if things would have went differently, then people then leadership that is willing to compromise a bit more from the Israeli side would have arisen. So so the the failure of Camp David is circumstantial rather than premeditated.
Okay.
That's how I view it. Now, how did we get into a Camp David that's so fragile that once it collapses, then the area is ready for another intifada? Then it has to do with the fact that during the 90s, Israelis did not feel safer. And during the 90s, the Palestinians did not see that things were headed towards an independent state, particularly because of the settlements that were growing at a record pace, not during Rabin, but during Netanyahu and then Barak, at a record pace. And um, I can so in the podcast I explain why I try to explain the Palestinian violence, not justify it, of course, but explain the dynamic, the kind of dance that Israel, Hamas, and the Palestinian Authority were engaged in. But that sometimes included the Palestinian Authority cracking down on Hamas, and sometimes it included letting go. Also, there was the dynamic of settler violence, not consistently, but the massacre in El Khalil, in Hebron, was a major escalatory event.
You're talking about
Perpetrated.
the massacre in February 1994.
Yeah, in Hebron, in
Yeah,
Khalil.
you're talking about the Cave
Yeah,
of Patriots, and
yeah,
of course,
yeah.
you're
And so that
talking
was a
sign. You're
huge
talking about the sign,
escalatory moment.
which is called for three faiths.
Yeah, but also you see that both Hamas and Jihad respond to what Israel is doing. So
Of course,
when the Yihya Yash is assassinated, then there's counter attack. So again, I'm not blaming. And people would, Israelis or Zionists will accuse me of blaming Israel for Palestinian violence, but this is a conflict. One side does this, the other
of
side
course.
retaliates, and vice
You
versa.
have retaliation.
Yeah. But Palestinian violence is responsible for the complete erosion of confidence in is on the Israeli side, and why the emergent violence of the beginning of the Intifada was cracked down to an extent that exasperated and destroyed everything. Right. The fact is that Israelis did not get more secure after this peace process.
Israel was
And
never Israel never sorted out the major problem of security from day one until 2024.
I think the problem is that Israel was not willing for Hamas. I think, and that's a chronic problem till today, for Hamas to be absorbed into the Palestinian Authority.
Mm-hmm.
it preferred that the element of Hamas would be outside legitimate governance,
Okay.
but in that sense, it had to tolerate that there will be Hamas weapons
Yeah,
outside of legitimate tolerance.
of course.
So whether in the 90s Israel was unwilling to do it and had its good reasons to do it. In 2024, we're at the same stop that we're at the same point where any Palestinian leader that would assume a state that will be peaceful towards Israel has to absorb Hamas as a party inside that state. There's even after October 7th.
Of course.
It's we had that very basic condition hasn't changed. The fantasies that the Palestinian Authority will dissolve Hamas, there will be you know, people like to point out at Altalena, right?
Yeah.
How Ben Gurion, made a crucial decision, a tough decision, and pointed Zionist weapons against Zionist people, against another Zionist faction. But Altalena is not the whole story, right? At the end of the day, the political faction that was attacked in Altalena was absorbed into the mechanisms of the state,
Mm,
became a party, and eventually became the ruling party.
of course.
A similar thing will have to happen with Hamas, and that's what didn't happen in the 90s. And again, there might have been good reason for that. But that's Palestinian violence. On the other hand, I really try to understand the issue with the settlements. Now, I like with Rabin did a reasonable job in curtailing the settlements. Netanyahu opened the floodgates, but there's a reason for that because A, ideologically, he liked settlements,
Of course.
and B, because his coalition was a right-wing coalition. So it just and in truth, when he moved forward with the peace process, then his coalition collapsed. So
Yeah, go ahead.
um, so but during Barak, there was also building in the settlements. Barak seemed to not care about the situation. And Barak is from the labor movement. So looking back, I tried to realize because the Palestinians were very clear, in as much as Israelis were clear, that the settlements are destroying the public support for the process amongst the Palestinian society. And the more moderate factions in the PLO and Fatah were begging, they were being interviewed in Israeli press, stop the settlements. They really could not, they couldn't justify the process with their own constituencies. And Israel, for some reason, ignored. And if one reason for that I think has been neglected was that if you look in the 90s, you see that Barak himself is on the record as saying eviction of settlements and touching that topic is explosive. It's what's killed the prime minister, right? But it's not impossible. And Israel has proven already that in the Sinai area that it's able to evict settlements.
Yeah.
So this is something that an Israeli prime minister didn't want to handle at the beginning. You wanted to handle that once there's a signed uh, treaty, final status treaty, and and you could also see that in the wider that Israelis, the majority of Israelis, not just the radical left wing, saw these settlements as ephemeral.
Mm.
The mood was I can show I've noticed there was a lot of talk about compensation before. There was a lot of talk about evicting the Gaza Strip settlements in the 90s, way before the disengagement.
Yeah.
There were people that were asking proactively for compensation in return for leaving now, and it the Israelis didn't see this as a as the problem, the concrete problem that the Palestinians did. But as the years passed by and the settlement population grew, and there was even and then began the phenomenon of outposts that are supposedly illegal, but Israel, if it could, if it wanted to, it could dismantle them. So uh, so that reality is what eroded Palestinian confidence in in the process, and why I think the situation deteriorated so quickly in September October 2000.
I think we can close here, and we're going to continue. Cheers. We're going to continue our conversation about the second Camp David. We had successful Camp David in 1978 and unsuccessful Camp David in 2000 with Bill Clinton and Ehud Barak and late Arafat negotiating. I'm thanking you for your time, and we'll definitely keep in touch. All the
Bye
best to
bye.
you, and I hope the atmosphere at your university is going to remain calm and academic.
Yeah, I hope so too. Thanks so much. Have a great weekend.
Thank you so
Bye.
much. Bye bye.